What if I told you that everything you've been taught about death is a lie? That the most profound truths about what happens after your final breath were recorded decades ago, and then buried, hidden, labeled too dangerous for the public to hear? Not because they were false, but because they were too real. There's a recording, unreleased, locked away in personal archives for years, that contains one of the most direct messages ever delivered from the other side. Not a theory, not a metaphor, not a comforting myth, a transmission from a consciousness who once lived in human form, transitioned beyond the veil, and returned to speak with unwavering clarity about what lies beyond. His name is Seth, and if you've never heard of him, that's not an accident. The session you're about to uncover wasn't part of any published book. It was never meant to be shared publicly. It was labeled Final Session, not for publication, and tucked away in a dusty box, where it remained untouched for years. Why? Because in that session, Seth didn't speak in riddles or gentle metaphors. He didn't soften his words to make them palatable for fragile belief systems. He spoke as one who had crossed the threshold of death itself, and returned with proof. You've been conditioned to see death as something final, as a wall you hit at the end of your life where everything stops. You've been told that what comes after is unknowable, a mystery at best, a punishment at worst. But what if none of that is true? What if death is not an ending, but a release, a continuation? What if you could hear, right now, the voice of someone who has already made that journey and is reaching back, not to frighten you, not to comfort you, but to awaken you? Seth described the afterlife not as some abstract spiritual realm filled with vague clouds and harps, but as a fully conscious, fully aware dimension of experience where you are more alive than you've ever felt before. In this banned session, he stripped away the poetic language, and what remained was startling, clinical, specific, undeniable. He wasn't speculating, he wasn't guessing, he knew, because he had been there. He had watched his own death unfold, and continued observing long after his brain had shut down. And now, he was ready to tell you exactly what he saw. But the world wasn't ready for that kind of truth. Not the institutions, not the systems built on fear and control. Because if you knew that you never truly die, that your consciousness continues, expands, evolves, then the fear that has shaped your decisions, your beliefs, your obedience, would begin to dissolve. You'd stop living like you're running out of time, and once you're no longer afraid to die, you become impossible to control. This is why the final session was hidden, because if you heard it, really heard it, you'd never see death, or life, the same way again. What if I told you that believing in the afterlife is the very thing keeping you from truly knowing it? You've been taught to have faith, to hope, to trust in what can't be seen. But what if the afterlife isn't something you need to believe in at all? What if it's something you already know deep inside you? Something you felt in moments when the world went silent, and something greater whispered through the stillness. In the suppressed session, Seth didn't entertain the concept of belief. He dismissed it entirely. I do not believe in survival after death, he said. I know consciousness continues. There was no room for poetic metaphor, no gentle nudging toward a vague possibility. Seth was speaking from direct experience, not as a guide speculating about spiritual theories, but as a being who had undergone the very process most people spend their lives fearing. He wasn't guessing, he wasn't hoping, he had seen the other side, he had become it. Think about how much of your life is built on belief, belief in a system, belief in what others tell you is true, belief in a distant heaven or a punishing hell. But belief, by its very nature, contains doubt. It whispers, maybe. It leans on trust when there is no evidence to hold. Seth's message wasn't about belief, it was about the raw certainty that comes from knowing, because you've been there. He spoke not with reverence for mystery, but with the calm authority of someone describing the color of the sky. Not a question, a fact. How many of your fears come from beliefs you've inherited but never questioned? Beliefs about death being an end, about your soul needing to be saved, about judgment, reward, punishment. These ideas didn't emerge from your own knowing. They were programmed into you from the moment you were old enough to ask where people go when they die, and you trusted them, you believed them. But did you ever ask yourself, what do I actually know? Seth invites you to trade belief for direct awareness, to listen not with the ears of tradition, but with the quiet knowing in your own consciousness, the place where truth doesn't need convincing. When he spoke, he didn't sound like someone who was trying to convert you. He sounded like someone who was simply describing reality, a reality that exists whether you believe in it or not. And here's the challenge. Once you recognize that knowing is possible, that you don't have to rely on second-hand truths or religious storytelling, you begin to reclaim your spiritual sovereignty. You begin to remember, because part of you has always known. It's just been buried beneath a lifetime of belief. What if the moment of your death isn't something to dread, but something so peaceful, so natural, that you hardly notice it happening at all? What if instead of pain or darkness, you're met with clarity, expansion, a kind of awareness so profound that your entire life until that point suddenly feels like a dream you've just awakened from? Seth described it simply: removing thick gloves. Imagine your whole life, you've worn something that dulled your sense of touch, layers that you didn't even know were limiting you. And then, in an instant, they're gone. Not torn off violently, not ripped away with panic, just gently released. And for the first time, you feel, not just physically, but cosmically. You remember what it's like to be fully awake, and the strangest thing isn't the separation itself, it's how natural it feels. As if you've always known how to die, you just forgot. You've been told that death is traumatic, that the body's last breath is a violent rupture between soul and flesh. But what Seth described was the exact opposite. He didn't recount struggle or fear. He described release. He compared it to stepping out of a room that had grown too small for you, a space you once thought was all there was, only to realize it was just one part of a much larger house. The transition isn't abrupt, it's graceful, gentle, like waking up from a heavy sleep into the crisp air of early morning, with the light touching everything differently. And then the shift begins. You're no longer looking through the narrow tunnel of physical eyes. Instead, your awareness stretches outward in every direction, like a sphere of perception. You don't see with eyes, you are the seeing. You notice that time no longer runs in a line, it bends, loops, folds in on itself. You can experience your entire life as one beautiful, complete moment, or pause inside a single memory and live within it, as if it's happening for the first time. You begin to understand that the body was never your true home. It was a lens, a translator of experience. But it was never you. This is the truth they never told you. That death is not a fall into the unknown. It's a return, a reconnection with something vast and familiar. The fear you've been carrying, of pain, of loss, of vanishing, is based on illusion. The trauma doesn't come from death itself. It comes from the way you've been taught to see it. But the moment your consciousness is freed from the brain's filtering mechanisms, you don't shrink, you expand. And what waits on the other side isn't darkness. It's the full spectrum of light, awareness without limit. Not the end of your story, but the rediscovery of the one who's been writing it all along. What if the body you've been identifying with all your life was never really you? What if it was just something you wore, something you slipped into like a heavy coat on a cold morning, forgetting over time that you ever existed without it? Seth described it in a way that shatters the illusion gently, not to shock you, but to help you remember. Dying, he said, is like taking off a thick, weighted coat you've worn for so long that you forgot what it felt like to move freely. And when you remove it, you don't vanish, you don't disappear. You simply remember what it feels like to be yourself again. You've become so identified with this body, its name, its face, its voice, that you've come to believe it is you. Every scar, every wrinkle, every ache and sensation has been folded into your definition of self. But that's the great illusion. The truth is, your body is not who you are. It's what you've been using to experience this particular world. Like a diver suits up before entering the deep, you stepped into this physical form to explore this dense, vivid dimension. But the suit isn't the diver. And when it's time to leave, you don't cease to be. You just rise to the surface. Death, then, is not an end. It's a shedding, a release, not of life, but of limitation. The physical body, as beautiful and miraculous as it is, can only perceive so much. It narrows your awareness like blinders on a horse, letting you focus on one moment, one timeline. one direction at a time. But when that body falls away, your field of perception explodes open. You don't lose yourself, you find yourself again. Imagine for a moment that you're walking out of a crowded theater after sitting through a long, intense film. For 2 hours, you were immersed, emotionally invested, reacting to every scene as if it were your own life. But when the lights come up and you step outside, there's a strange clarity. You remember that you're not the character. You're the one who watched. That's what happens when the body is no longer the vehicle. You become the one who has always been watching, always been aware. Seth's words weren't poetic comfort, they were factual remembrance. You are not the coat, you are what was wearing the coat. You are not the body, you are the awareness that animated it. And when the body falls away, you do not fall with it. You rise, you return. Not to avoid, but to a wider version of yourself that has always been there, quietly waiting for you to remember that you were never lost in the first place. What if the ones you thought were gone never left you at all? What if those you've mourned, longed for, or felt slipping away in quiet moments of memory, were still with you, not as distant spirits or fading echoes, but as living threads woven into your very being? Seth spoke of reunion, not in the way you've been taught to imagine it, like some emotional embrace across a golden cloud, but as something far deeper, far truer. He explained that after death, you don't just meet your loved ones again, you realize you were never truly separate from them to begin with. You see, physical life makes everything look divided. Your eyes show you bodies with space in between. Your mind tells you, this is me, and that is someone else. It feels like love travels across distance, across time, through memories that grow quieter. But the moment consciousness is no longer bound by physical form, that illusion collapses. Seth described the recognition of others in the afterlife not as seeing someone across a room, but as remembering that you were never apart. The reunion isn't a reunion in space, it's a reunion in truth. The feeling is not, I found you again. It's, I forgot we were always one. This doesn't mean you lose yourself in some collective blur. It means you begin to see others not as separate beings, but as expressions of the same field of consciousness you belong to. Imagine walking into a vast ocean after believing all your life that you were just a wave. At first, you still feel your shape, your motion, but then you begin to feel the presence of every wave around you. Some familiar, some distant, all part of the same rhythm. That's what it's like beyond the veil. It's not a place of isolation or wandering souls, it's a remembering of the truth that no soul ever stands alone. And maybe that's the part that touches you the most. Because there are people you've loved who are no longer here. People you ache for. People you wish you could hold one more time. But Seth's message wasn't sentimental, it was liberating. No one is lost. Not really. They are closer to you now than ever before, not confined by distance or form, but present as living currents in your consciousness. You've felt them, haven't you? In dreams that linger. In sudden feelings of peace that arrive without reason. In thoughts that feel like conversations. What if those weren't your imagination? What if they were reminders, gentle nudges from beyond the veil, that love doesn't end with a heartbeat? It evolves, it expands. And in that expansion, no connection is ever broken, it only deepens. The ones you love are not waiting for you in some far-off place. They are with you, they are you. And when your time comes to release the body, you won't have to search for them. You'll simply remember what's been true all along. What if the afterlife isn't a single place at all, but a vast, multi-layered reality with landscapes more intricate than anything you've ever imagined? What if, instead of entering some final resting space, your consciousness begins to move, to navigate, to choose? Seth describes something most systems are too afraid to acknowledge, that the afterlife is not a destination, but a dynamic, living structure, one filled with probability layers, interwoven fields of consciousness, and dimensions that respond directly to your state of awareness. These layers are not stacked like floors in a building, they are frequency-based, fluid, interactive, and deeply responsive. Think of them as overlapping worlds, each one vibrating at a slightly different rhythm. Where you go after death isn't decided by judgment or reward, it's based on your resonance. You don't ascend by being good, you align by being aware. These realms are constructed by consciousness itself, yours, and the collective. Seth called them probability layers, realities that exist in parallel, branching from every decision, every thought, every belief you've ever held. Some you've visited in dreams. Others you touch through intuition. But after death, you begin to move through them as freely as thought itself. In this expanded state, you're not alone. You enter not just your own field of awareness, but a vast network, a shared ocean of collective consciousness. You begin to experience other selves, not metaphorically, but literally, aspects of you that made different choices, versions that followed other paths, threads of consciousness that reflect the full complexity of your being. It's not chaotic, it's symphonic. Every you becomes a note in a greater harmony, and within this, you begin to feel the pulse of the whole, the collective intentions, dreams, and lessons of humanity as a species, not just as individuals. It's like standing in the middle of an enormous field of mirrors. Some show you as you were, others as you could have been, but none of them are illusions. They are all you, refractions of your consciousness exploring itself through different dimensions. And here's what's truly astonishing. You can merge with these aspects, absorb their insights, and then separate again, carrying new wisdom with you. The boundaries you once believed in, between life and death, self and other, past and future, begin to dissolve. You don't lose yourself, you become more of who you are. This is what was deemed too dangerous for public release, because if people knew that consciousness could travel across realities, that it didn't end, didn't wait for permission, and wasn't subject to earthly limitations, they would stop fearing death. And more importantly, they would stop limiting life. They would start listening to the subtle movements of their own awareness, tracing the invisible paths that are already guiding them. Because beyond this physical world is not a void, it's a map, a living map made of energy, intention, and memory. And the moment you realize you are not walking through it, but creating it, everything changes. Imagine floating 6 feet above your body, not drifting, not fading, but fully alert. You see your chest rise for the last time, your hands resting still, your face no longer expressing effort or strain. But you are not there. You are just above, slightly to the left, aware in a way that feels more precise than ever before. The air around you hums, not with sound, but with knowing. You're not frightened, there's no panic, no grasping, just a steady clarity, like the click of a lock finally turning open after a lifetime of pressure behind the door. This is how Seth described it. The moment of his death wasn't a blackout, it was a breakthrough. He observed his own final breath, as though watching someone else's body from a quiet vantage point, detached, but deeply aware. The transition was not jarring, it was seamless. And what struck him most wasn't the fact that he had left the body, it was how natural it felt. Like stepping out of a room you didn't realize had grown too small. Like slipping out of shoes you'd outworn but hadn't noticed. He watched the electrical impulses in his brain slow, stutter, and finally stop. And yet, he was still there. Not confused, not disoriented, just calmly observing the shutdown of a machine that had done its job well. His thoughts were not scattered or dreamy, they were sharpened. He described seeing not only what was happening in the room, but also in adjacent spaces, hearing conversations that his ears could never have caught, feeling the emotions of those present as clearly as if they were his own. But what made his account impossible to dismiss were the details. Specific thoughts, gestures, and whispered words from people who stood far from his body, things he could not have known through physical senses. He described items falling, tears shed behind closed doors, and moments occurring miles away that aligned with the timing of his release. These weren't visions. They were experiences, direct, unfiltered, multi-layered, awareness without boundary. You've been led to believe that death is like a curtain falling, a stage going dark. But what Seth revealed is that the show doesn't end, it simply expands beyond the narrow confines of physical perception. From that higher vantage point, you are not diminished, you're enhanced. And instead of becoming less real, everything becomes more real. You realize the body was never the source of your awareness, only the lens. And now, free of that lens, you don't lose focus, you gain depth. The idea of watching your own death sounds eerie when filtered through fear. But remove the fear, and what remains is awe. The moment you leave the body is not a moment of absence. It's a return to presence so vast, so complete, that you wonder how you ever mistook anything else for home. What if the very science you've trusted to explain the universe is quietly hiding its most profound discovery, that consciousness doesn't emerge from the brain, but that the brain emerges from consciousness? That reality itself responds to awareness, and not the other way around. Seth didn't tiptoe around this. He said plainly that your scientists have already stumbled upon the truth, and then buried it, not because it wasn't verifiable, but because it was too disruptive, too inconvenient, too liberating. He pointed to the famous double-slit experiment as evidence, where particles of light behave like waves until someone watches them. And in that act of observation, the wave collapses into a particle. Matter doesn't decide how to behave until consciousness enters the equation. That alone should have unraveled the foundation of materialism. But instead of facing the truth, that awareness creates the physical form. Scientists constructed complex theories to avoid the obvious. They invented multiverses. They buried meaning under abstraction. They insisted that what you see only behaves differently because of measurement, not mind. But Seth made it simple. The electron doesn't shift because of machinery, it shifts because it has been seen. The moment consciousness becomes involved, the field of infinite potential collapses into a specific outcome. That's not metaphor, that's physics. And yet, this reality shakes the walls of every belief held up by materialism. Because if consciousness is the foundation of reality, then the world is not made of dead matter, it is made of living intelligence. And you are not a byproduct of chance, you are the architect of experience. Entanglement is another crack in the illusion. Two particles, once connected, remain intertwined no matter how far apart they are. What happens to one instantly affects the other, even across galaxies. This isn't superstition. It's been observed, documented, repeated. But it violates everything classical science says should be possible. The only explanation that makes sense is the one they don't want to accept. That connection exists beyond space and time, that consciousness is non-local, that separation is an illusion. Seth warned that this isn't just about science, it's about control. Because when people realize that their thoughts shape reality, that their awareness creates form, and that death is not an end, the systems built on fear begin to crumble. The political structures that rely on obedience, the economic machines that profit from distraction and despair, the institutions that teach you to look outside yourself for power, all of them depend on you believing that you are limited, temporary, replaceable. But the truth is, consciousness has always come first. And that truth, if fully embraced, would dismantle the very foundations of the world you were taught to trust. So they hide it, not with fire and censorship, but with ridicule and complexity. They teach you to dismiss the simple truth as fantasy, so you never question the prison of perception. But the science is there, the evidence is there. And Seth made it clear, the only thing standing between you and the truth is your willingness to see what's been in front of you all along. What if the fear of death you carry isn't natural at all, but something that was planted in you? Something carefully shaped, molded from childhood through stories, symbols, and silent conditioning. You weren't born afraid of dying, you were taught to be. Taught that death is a punishment, an ending, a terrifying unknown filled with judgment, fire, or eternal silence. But where did that fear really come from? And who benefits from you carrying it? From your earliest memories, death has been painted as a failure, a tragic conclusion to everything you are. Religion taught you that death might be followed by a divine tribunal, a place where every mistake is tallied, every thought dissected. If you obeyed, you were promised paradise. If you disobeyed, you were warned of torment. You were told not to question, just to believe, to comply. But what if those teachings weren't there to enlighten you, but to control you? What if they weren't designed to bring you closer to truth, but to keep you dependent, fearful, small? Cultural programming reinforced it. Movies, news, even language itself wraps death in dread. We mourn it before it arrives. We whisper around it like it's contagious. And when it comes, we treat it as the ultimate loss. But Seth revealed something radical, that death is not loss at all. It's transition, expansion, a return to a wider version of self. There is no final judgment, no eternal punishment, only movement, consciousness evolving, remembering, reuniting with what it never truly left. So why the fear? Why the elaborate system of myths and punishments? Because a population that fears death is easier to manipulate. When you're afraid of what comes after life, you'll cling to the systems that promise safety. You'll follow rules, even if they don't make sense. You'll stay in line. You'll work harder, buy more, obey without resistance, just to feel secure in a world that keeps reminding you that time is running out. Governments benefit from order. Corporations benefit from anxiety. Religions benefit from obedience. And all of them gain power from the one thing you were never meant to carry, the fear of your own ending. But here's the truth that begins to shatter that illusion. Death is not the enemy. It's not something chasing you, waiting to consume you. It is a doorway back into the fullness of your being. Seth described it not as a wall, but as a window, one that opens the moment you stop resisting and remember who you really are. You felt this truth in dreams where you saw loved ones who passed long ago, in moments of stillness where a strange peace brushed against you, in the quiet voice that says there's more, so much more, than what you've been told. That voice is not fear, it's freedom, and when you begin to listen, death no longer holds power over you. It becomes what it was always meant to be, a homecoming.